I'd appreciate that. And we'll get underway. So welcome to the Ethical Humanist Society, if you're a visitor here. I'm Buzz States, and I've been a member here since 2008. Each week we start the program with a reading that highlights our humanist principles, and this morning's reading is from the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a progressive life stance that, without theism or other supernatural beliefs, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead meaningful, ethical lives capable of adding to the greater good of humanity. Our programs address a wide variety of topics selected to enrich and inform our lives, including philosophy, arts, and sciences. Today's program is Mejdi Tours, Harnessing the Power of Travel to Create a More Peaceful World. Our speaker today, Susan Jarzembski, is the Director of Partnerships and Special Projects at Mejdi Tours and InterAct. She's an experienced communications specialist with a career that included on-air broadcasting, a syndicated newspaper column, and corporate public relations for multiple national brands. She is focused on creative relationship building for Fortune 500 companies and in the nonprofit world. Susan is here to present Mejdi Tours' unique dual narrative approach to socially responsible travel. Please welcome Susan.
Thanks so much. Thanks for being here. I'm happy to be here, and I have to give a shout out to Svetlana, who I met last summer, and she really exemplifies the kind of qualities I'll be talking about today, because we both belong to an organization called Braver Angels, and they were having a convention, and I didn't have a way to get there. So she graciously offered to drive me all the way to Kenosha. So thank you, Svetlana. I didn't want to go. As a matter of fact, I was certain I didn't want to go, even though my costs were covered by my husband's fellowship. I was busy at work. I was doing PR for a global wine company. I was traveling back and forth between Chicago and Napa. And frankly, Israel was not on my bucket list. I did, though, read something about this dual narrative tour thing, and my husband was a good lobbyer, and so at a weak moment, I decided I would go. And that is how I found myself a few months later standing in front of Yasser Arafat's memorial. Truthfully, a bit scared. The atmosphere was tense. It's not a place that many Americans go. And in order to get there, to Ramallah, you have to go through a number of checkpoints. I'm sure you've been hearing and certainly know about the checkpoints that are there. Imagine the scene with me, if you will, and this isn't from the day I was there. And next to the memorial are two guards with machine guns, very somber. This was not a place, our tour group, would kind of chit-chat. This was not a chit-chat place. It was very somber. And we had a Palestinian guide and an Israeli guide, which is the nature of the dual narrative tour. Our Palestinian guide spoke first. He said, "This man was a great leader. He has stood up for my people. He was our George Washington, my hero." Then our Israeli guy got up there next to this memorial. And he said, "I was terrified by this man as a child. I had nightmares about him. He has Israeli blood on his hands. He's a terrorist and an enemy of the people." Now, I was hoping, seriously, that the guards did not speak English, because this was all in English, because that's pretty emotionally charged at this very important spot for Palestinians. And what usually happens when people have such diametrically opposed narratives about a particular topic or a particular person. What's been happening here lately? So, what happened there? I watched the two men then look at each other, turn away, walk away with their arm around each other, and one of them said, "You know, when we disagree, I like to put my arm around you." What a different approach to life. This is the heart of the dual narrative, and this tour, and two others I took with the company before I ever started to work for them, changed my life. The tour originated with these two guys, Aziz Abu Sara in the darker glasses. He's a Palestinian who grew up in Jerusalem, and an American Jewish guy, Scott Cooper. They'd been working together in peace and reconciliation at George Mason University. They were in charge of a peace and reconciliation program there, and they wanted to make the world a better place. You know, a lot of us have that desire, but we don't ever really say, okay, we're going to do something about this. So they thought about travel, and they thought about how in travel, you're much more open to new ideas. I'll give you an example. If you live in an apartment building and somebody next door to you is from another country, and there might be different smells from the food, they might not understand you, and you're not like, oh, wow, this is so interesting, I want to get to know you. Sometimes it's more closed off than that. But when we travel, we're specifically looking for the differences, which is so interesting. I had never thought about that before. In travel, we don't want to go to a place that is the same as here. I don't know if any of you watch International House Hunters. Anybody here watch that show? Anyway, they go and look, and one of the first things people always say is, oh, I want this to have French character. I don't want this to look like home. So that's what Aziz and Scott clued into. And back in 2009, they came up with this idea of bringing people to places of conflict, not just anywhere, and exposing them to the different viewpoints. And they felt that it would have a ripple effect when people came back home, as well as an effect on the local communities. So, where did they start this experiment? They set a pretty high bar, because they decided to begin in the Holy Land. Now, it was fitting in one sense, because that's where Aziz grew up, yet challenging because it is a place where the conflict is so entrenched, so many lives lost, injustices committed, and hope seems pretty dim, then and now. Imagine what it would have been like, and what it is going to continue to be like, to recruit Palestinians and Israelis who are willing to work together. Now, one of my surprises the first time I went to Israel was that you can live in a community that's a block away from another community, the Israelis and the Palestinians, and they have never met each other in, one, because of language barrier, two, because of cultural barriers. And so bringing people who are Palestinian and Israelis together was very unusual and very rare. And I will say that Aziz and Scott persevered. They gathered these local leaders who had different viewpoints, diametrically opposed, but who shared the goal of peace. But they didn't know if it would work. I got to experience it close up and personal, and it does work. On our trip, we visited all the historic sites. We met with political leaders on all sides of the conflict. Oh, and we stayed in great hotels. That made a difference too. After an intense day, to be able to come back to the American Colony Hotel in the West Bank, it was wonderful. And Aziz took us to his family's house. Now, his family can't live there because of all sorts of regulations with the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, but the house still exists there. So we were able to go, and we had makluba. Anyone here ever had makluba? Well, she came out of the kitchen. You can see this round plate here. It's like this big, and you dump it upside down on the table, and then everyone shares it. One night, we set out to meet with another group of people. You know, part of the idea is that you not only have guides who have different viewpoints, but they introduced us to different people in the West Bank and different places in Israel, Palestine, where we would meet the voices of the local community. So one night, we went to a meeting, to a group called the Parents Circle. The Parents Circle is a group of people who lost family members. No one wants to be a part of this group. And these men and women on other sides of the conflict have realized that their sorrow can bring them together. On the right is Rami, who we met. He's a former IDF member. In 1997, his daughter and a few of her friends went to buy books. Instead of coming home, she and her friends were killed by 2 Palestinian suicide bombers who murdered 5 people that day. Here's Rami's own words in response. What occurred here? What can drive someone to such anger and despair as to be willing to blow himself up with little girls? And most important, what can you personally do to prevent this intolerable suffering from others? I can't imagine saying something like that afterwards, and yet he did. The man on the left is Bassam. His story is quite unbelievable. At 17, he was caught planning an attack against Israeli troops. He was labeled a terrorist at 17. He spent 7 years in prison. But something happened when he was in prison, and he found himself on a path that took him from revenge to peaceful hope. And in 2005, he co-founded Combatants for Peace. So imagine, this is his journey of being accused of being a terrorist at 17, being in jail, and then not coming out hating. You know, it's interesting, and I've heard so many people say, you know, with the conflict, with the war right now in Gaza, that we're just raising another generation of people who are going to hate. These are stories who that didn't happen. Their journey took them on another path. So he founded this peace organization, and then 2 years later, his daughter, who you see on the left, was gunned down and killed by an Israeli soldier on her way home from school. How is he going to respond from an attack? Going from prison, becoming a peace builder, how would he process this? Would he still remain a peace builder? Could he still say, I want to forgive? Would he remain fiercely committed? Here's what he said. Aren't those beautiful girls? Abir's murder could have easily led me down to the path of hatred and vengeance, but for me, there is no return to violence from nonviolence. After all, it was one Israeli soldier who shot my daughter, but 100 former Israeli soldiers who built a garden in her name at the school where she was murdered. For such a time as this, we have a choice. We see people outraged at such large and small injustices. We're so quick to judge. I'm so quick to judge. Left, right, you're wrong. And we surround ourselves in an echo chamber of like-mindedness. We read of the encroachment of tribalism, sectarianism, walls. Can we choose a different path? I heard this talk, I don't know how long ago he gave it, that Barack Obama gave in South Africa, and he was on to the same thing. Most of us prefer to surround ourselves with opinions that validate what we already believe. You notice the people who you think are smart are the people who agree with you? Funny how that works. You know, it's funny that he said that, because I remember him saying that phrase. He would say, funny how that works. But democracy demands that we're able also to get inside the reality of people who are different than us, so we can understand their point of view. Maybe we will change their minds, but maybe they'll change ours. To me, it's that last part that's so critical. Beyond the listening, if you just listen because, well, you want to understand, but do you want to actually be educated by what this person who is the other says? So the brilliance of these words is that it didn't stop with maybe we will change their minds, but maybe they will change ours. And they challenge us to be willing to move into new territory where maybe our minds will be changed. And that certainly happened to me over my 3 trips with Mejdi. I believe that one way that we can change the world really is through travel, a new kind of travel. Mejdi is now changing hearts and minds through tours to more than 20 locations around the world. The Balkans, Northern Ireland, Vietnam. The Vietnam tours, they're amazing. All working with the local communities, supporting local communities. Here's Aziz Abu Sara, who started the company, with just a very short overview. We'll see if...
What if your next trip was not just a vacation, but a chance to change the world? My hope for a more peaceful world led me to a discovery: harnessing the power of travel to transform lives. Imagine being exposed to multiple points of view in the Holy Land, Colombia, Cambodia, Northern Ireland, and many other places. Can we as a people learn from our past? Can we help change the future through travel? Can this be true by listening, engaging, and learning? The answer is yes. It's not where you travel, but how that makes all the difference.
Does it work? You know, I can speak anecdotally for myself that this changed how I treated my coworkers, how I treat my family. It really did. It made a difference. You know, I think about if 2 men like Bassam and Brahmi can come together, who am I to like question, you know, at the core motives from different people. So we've done surveys in addition to my own viewpoints on experiencing this kind of travel. 83% of travelers change their attitudes and perceptions, and research shows that the most salient function appears to be the cultivation of empathy for the other. The dual narrative tours also been found to prompt visitors to understand that conflict is more complicated than they had originally thought. Remember the bereaved parents group I talked to you about? In addition to founding Mejdi and InterAct, Aziz is also qualified to be a member of that group. This is Aziz when he was a little boy, next to his brother Tazir. You see, he lost his brother in the conflict. Aziz was young, he was just 10. I'm gonna read, this is Aziz's book, Crossing Boundaries, A Traveler's Guide to World Peace. I'm just gonna read a little bit about that event from the book. This event shaped me the most, and it happened when I was little. Just after dawn, Israeli soldiers stormed into our home. I remember the shouts, the terror, the interrogations. And then They took my 18-year-old brother, Tazir, away. He was arrested for allegedly throwing stones at soldiers. I have memories of waking up early in the morning, stumbling into a bus provided by the International Committee of the Red Cross, and waiting for hours before they released the prisoners into an open, fenced-off area. Families rushed toward the fencing while the imprisoned loved ones desperately searched for them on the other side of the fence. When we finally noticed Tazir behind the fence, our voices were drowned out by other families squeezed beside us, screaming over one another. The Israeli police allowed us just 10 minutes for the visit. And remember, he was a teenager. It was frantic and noisy, a frenzied competition for space, elbows flying, everybody hoping to have a rare moment with their loved one. I was angry and frustrated. It was also summer, extremely hot, and no one gave us water. I remember one of the soldiers looked at me, and I looked into his eyes, and I thought he was evil. One thing was clear in my mind. He was, quite simply, the oppressor. This was the portrait I had of the Israelis, the soldiers who tore my family apart and managed the prison that kept my brother inside a cage. Soon after, my brother was released from prison, but by then his organs were failing from the beatings he had sustained during Israeli interrogation sessions. We rushed him to the hospital, but he died of his injuries. So it's interesting that Aziz went from that to founding a company, embracing peace, rejecting labeling people as evil, and has influenced people all around the world because he was able to turn his back on revenge. And now he's a peace builder, entrepreneur, honored for his work, becoming a TED Fellow, National Geographic Explorer, author, and he's been doing this, since 2009. And then something happened. On October 7th, Maoz's parents were killed at their home in the cooperative farming community close to Gaza, where Maoz Ian had grown up. Aziz knew of Maoz in Israeli, but they didn't really know each other. They might have met once, they think, at a meeting. And Aziz reached out to Maoz. Now, I don't know how you might feel as an Israeli hearing from a Palestinian that you don't really know just after your parents had been killed by Hamas. Since that time, both Aziz and Maoz have focused on spreading their message. They've gone to Washington, D.C. When Netanyahu was giving his speech, they met with the Congress people who wanted to do an alternative event so that they could hear that peace is not only possible, it's inevitable. They were invited to speak with the Pope. When they were there, the Pope asked them, "What can I do?" Well, they were ready. They had a list of things that they wanted to present at the G7, and they couldn't go, but the Pope presented those, and they were written into their recommendations. And they've talked at universities and events across the country and the world. Maoz has now also joined the leadership of InterAct International. InterAct is the not-for-profit arm of Mejdi. InterAct amplifies the voices of peacemakers, provides educational support for families brutalized by conflict, and these are the first scholarship recipients, the 2024 scholarship recipients. It's such a beautiful thing. I think most of them are from the West Bank. This particular scholarship is for girls, and it's both for girls who are in grade school all the way through college. InterAct is calling out the best in people, educating and helping all of us really, to embrace peace, to reject revenge, and believing that peace is not only possible, it is inevitable. I heard a talk recently, and the man said that after experiencing pain, you either transmit that pain or you can transform that pain. I've just heard a lot of talk. People, they just believe that we are only able to transmit pain if we've received it. And we can transform it. We've seen it so many times through so many wars that things have gotten better. And that's exactly what Aziz and Maoz are doing, exactly. Through Mejdi, transforming the lives of the travelers and the local communities and the people who the travelers talk to, like me when they get back, and through InterAct's healing presence. I just want to tell you one more story because for me it was so instructive. Kind of like sometimes people hear about these ideas and they think, but this isn't really real. Do they really have peace inside? Have they given up revenge? And how in big situations or small. So we were with our group at the American Colony Hotel, and we were with a spokesperson of Netanyahu's. And we were sitting around a U-shaped conference table, and this representative of Netanyahu was seated across from Aziz, so I could see both of them very clearly. I could see Aziz's face. And I remember the representative was answering a question about, well, why hasn't peace happened? Why haven't the Palestinians and the Israelis been able to solve their conflict? And he said very clearly that the reason the Palestinians were in the plight they were in was because they couldn't come to the table and broker the deal because they weren't smart enough. Not kidding, not kidding. And that they were incapable of governing themselves. Now, our group, which leaned pretty, well, it doesn't matter which way they leaned, our group, steam was coming out of their heads. They were just, you could see, they did not have poker faces at all. Aziz, completely, he looked relaxed and everything, and he didn't say a word. I think we all thought he would at least say something this time. This time, one of the people from the other side went too far. And so he didn't. The talk ended, but as soon as the talk was over, Aziz went zooming up to this representative. And I was close enough, and everybody was kind of like, going like this to see what he was going to say. And Aziz said, want to have a cup of coffee? I'd love to talk to you and get to know you. I want to be like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That was inspiring. Before Susan takes our questions, we're going to have a short musical break. And during that break, please show your support for programming like this with a donation as the basket is passed around. $10 is suggested, but any amount you're able to give is appreciated. You can also make a contribution at our website and also via QR codes that are posted around the building. Now it's time for questions for Susan. Please line up with the microphone and try to keep your questions short without commentary so we can get to as many as possible. Anyone viewing this program on YouTube can submit your questions in the chat box, and I'll read them out to the speaker.
Thanks so much for sharing your experience, and it's very inspiring, obviously. I have 75 questions, but I'm just going to ask one right now, but I'll come back, Buzz, if you need more. So I wonder always, I've been really involved in similar international things, not quite this, but same idea of like bringing, and I always wonder how it could help, or whether it could help even more hyper locally. Should we be doing this between the north side, like the north suburbs and the south side of Chicago? Like, what are the mechanisms to do this on a really local level? Is kind of always front of mind as soon as I start thinking about this stuff. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yes and yes. You know, I think when you come back, when people come back from these trips, they start looking at local things differently and wanting to reach out. An international example is some drug leaders in the drug community in Colombia, who that was their business, and they are now working with the local community as tour guides for Americans who come over. You know, I mean, so can we take those same models and bring them here? Absolutely. I think that's the purpose of this, is the ripple effect. It doesn't always have to be someplace else that we're looking for. You know, in Aziz's book, he talks about volunteering and how people are excited to go to some other country to volunteer. And he said, before you go to another country to volunteer, try volunteering, you know, in North Chicago. Yeah, before you go.
We have a question from a YouTube viewer. Can you tell us more about the InterAct activities?
InterAct was born because we needed to have a more not-for-profit arm for Mejdi, and we realized that there were educational needs that were very serious, and we wanted to try to meet those needs, and we would meet people who would say, we want to help. So InterAct was formed. There's going to be, it's in process, iinteract.org, and they have educational programs. We're doing a series of talks with Israelis and Palestinians online that people can sign up for. Like, if your group wanted to have an online seminar with some Israelis and Palestinians of how they do this reconciliation, how are they able, even during this time, to support one another, we offer that. And we also have an online history center that gives the narrative of the land, Palestine, Israel, and from different viewpoints. So you can go through the whole history and see the different viewpoints that people have. And it's not about changing someone's viewpoint, it's about hearing the whole story.
And how is InterAct funded?
InterAct is funded by donations. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hi.
Hello, my name is Ivy. So a lot of your talk focused on sort of how people address the conflict interrelationally and sort of in personal relationships and healing through that way. But the nature of this conflict is also very dependent on systems of power and a huge disparity in power in the two different narratives that are focused on in the tour. And so I'm just curious, how does the tour address the power disparity that's in play here and entrenched in the conflict?
That's a good question. I'm kind of going a couple of different ways. I think in terms of looking at the larger picture and the power brokers, if you will, That's something Aziz and Maoz are doing in their peace talks. And they're doing all of their peace talks when they go around, whether it's in Europe with the Pope, with Congress, that they're making inroads there. One of the things that Mao says is that why aren't there any peace builders right now in the conversations about brokering a peace? So they actually are trying to be those peace brokers in the conversations to be able to influence the official representatives. And they're making some inroads. On the tours themselves, it's really more about meeting the local community members and having them you could influence them by supporting them, but it's really about taking that message home here and seeing what kind of a difference people can make here.
Susan, could you stay
Oh,
at
I'm
the
sorry,
microphone?
yeah.
Thank you.
I do have a loud voice, though.
I'm just amazed that some of these people are much more magnanimous than I think I could ever be. But I'm also wondering about how to be magnanimous when there is no accountability. It seems like that has to be part of the things, like the story you mentioned about the one individual IDF soldier murdering a child.
Yeah.
It would seem like there was a story, several months back about 3 prisoners who were escaping with a white flag and were murdered by some IDF soldiers because they thought they were Palestinian.
Right.
And yet, there's no accountability. And it seems like that seems to have to be part of the process, is to have some accountability in the whole thing rather than just impunity. It just seems, how can you have one without the other?
So, absolutely. When Maoz talks about this, I wish he was here right now, because he has such authority to speak about it, right, with his parents. He said, here's the deal. Peace is going to happen. Peace is going to happen. And people who have done horrendous things are going to be talking to each other. People who have killed people are going to be talking to each other. And that's how it is. And we have to realize that. So he said, I forgive the Israelis don't, he forgives the Israeli component of his parents being killed. He forgives the Palestinian, the Hamas component. He forgives it all. He said, because that's not going to get us over here. That's not going to get us to peace. I mean, that's his viewpoint. Yeah, it's
not really a follow-up, but it seems like
yeah.
the crimes have to stop first. It just seems like that.
Yeah. Yes. Agree. Yes. And you know, maybe it's like everybody has their path, and this is their path for Aziz and Moz and our company. Our path is to focus on peace. Yeah. It's not a complete answer, I realize.
I was expecting a very complete answer.
Yeah.
Thank you for that really moving and inspiring and hopeful talk. You said a few times that their belief is that peace is inevitable. Mm-hmm. Can you convince me about that one? Like,
you know,
what makes them say that?
I can't, but I really believe that Maoz and Aziz can. And I can direct you to videos to see their whole TED Talk. That was just a snippet of their TED Talk. I think that would be incredible. Moz looked out in an audience in Europe recently and said, "You don't think peace is possible? Look at you. Your kids play soccer together. Would have you thought that during the middle of World War II? Would have you really thought that? No, you wouldn't have." And so he's just so focused that, you know, I'm on that same bandwagon. I'm gonna go along with peace is inevitable and possible. But I would suggest, looking at some of their other videos that are, they're so much more articulate, obviously, than I am, and their knowledge and their background of what they bring. I think they'd also be able to have a much better answer to your question in the back row about the power structures. You could hear them speaking about that as well.
We have another question from an online viewer. Is there support for or pushback against peace-building work that Mejdi and InterAct are doing in Israel at this time? I assume that means hasn't changed since October 7th.
I would think interpersonally, on the just individual level, yes. There's some peace builders that Aziz and Maoz have worked with who now are, kind of took a little side road. So, yeah, and like, Aziz said, it took him a long time after his brother died. So it's not judgment about people who are saying we need to have these other things happen first before we can forgive or before we can start, even talking about this. But I think that that pushback, they've been used to it, And again, it's just staying in your lane, focused.
Hi, I'm Dave.
Hi.
There's two ways that I can think of communicating. One is through words, and one is through music. And when you met with representatives from both sides of this conflict or in other situations, can you describe any music that was presented when you were together and exactly what sort of music that was and what the effect was?
What a great question. That's so interesting. Yes, there's a question I can answer completely, I think. When we were having dinner at Aziz's family home, and there was a big picture of his brother Tazir up on the wall. After dinner, a group of Palestinians and Israelis who make music together were there. And we danced, and I have a copy out in the lobby, I don't know, or the other room out there. I have a copy of the Smithsonian magazine. Does anyone know Geraldine Brooks, the author? Yeah, okay, there's a few nods. She came along on one of our trips, and she wrote an article, a cover story for a Smithsonian magazine. And there's a picture of us dancing, so you can see how the music affected us. And just seeing, that was one of the reasons I think that Aziz and Maoz wanted to do the opening talk this year and were invited for the TED Talk. Because at that time, just seeing an Israeli and a Palestinian together, that they were ready to talk, it seemed soon, presented just the picture of it. And the same thing about music, just seeing musicians who are from both sides. There's also, I think it's called the Jerusalem Youth Chorus, and they've been performing still with members from both sides of the conflict.
One thing I think we learn about what people are doing, the effectiveness of what people are doing, is who are they making mad? Who's against these guys? Do they attract hateful mail, comments, whatever, and who are like, where are they not welcome?
I do their booking, so I'm trying to think where they're not where they're not welcome. I'm going to start with where they are being welcomed, if you don't mind, which is a wonderful thing, is universities. And that's been fabulous since like for the past 8 months. They've been invited to universities across the country. And I wish it was in the media more, because what we see are protests. And that's another one of their points, is we see the protests. We don't see the peace builders. Why don't we see the peace builders? Why aren't people like them? And it's not just Aziz and Maoz. So many others who are on the ground, still working together for peace, but they're not on the nightly news, you know. I think we don't hear from those people, but certainly on social media, they do. They hear the negative comments all the time. Yeah. Someone actually, either last week or the week before, who works for Mejdi, saw some really negative comments and asked Aziz, you know, and he goes, it's all the time. Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about the Middle East, but I believe you do this work in other locations as well, including Colombia. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and also about the safety issues, risk, et cetera, to the people who take part in these tours?
So the other countries we go to are countries that have had, mostly countries that have had conflict, you know. So in Vietnam, we have, which by the way, I found out, I didn't know that the Vietnamese call it the American War, not the Vietnam War. Who knew? Of course they did. But they bring together American pilots and Vietnamese soldiers who fought against each other in groups, and then bring our customers to hear those conversations. In Northern Ireland, we have one of the leaders who signed the peace accords, who's working with us. In Colombia, as you know, it's people who were, you know, drug lords who now have turned their backs on that and want to work in their communities for reconciliation. You know, in all of these things, you can always look back to, but look what they did, but look what they did, but look what they did. And there has to be a point where you say, but look what we can do. You know, I guess it gets back to transmit or transform. And there's information, again, out the doors for some of the tours that we give in places around the world.
More questions? I have one last, which is, given the nature of your business, what happened to you during COVID? And have you bounced back fully?
Yeah, I did want to talk about that. So during COVID, can you imagine? Oh my gosh, a travel company? What were we to do? And we were supporting. Part of the thing is we support the guides. You know, this is their income. So the Palestinians and Israelis, we're supporting them through our business, and there wasn't anything. And so we first decided to do a live stream show, and on the live stream show, we would invite, you know, pairs of people who were had different viewpoints, and we had Daryl Davis, a black man who was brought up in a diplomatic family, and he didn't live in the U.S. And he, when he came to the U.S., he was like, "Oh, people don't like us," because he wasn't used to that. And so instead of it's incredible to me. All of these people, they're my heroes. He was like, "I just want to find out why. Why don't you like us?" So what did he do? He reached out to the Ku Klux Klan. I am not kidding. I'm not kidding. And befriended people in the Klan. So we would have conversations with people like Daryl. We would have a skinhead who was in, I think this is in the book, was in McDonald's, and there was a woman behind the counter who might have been there, a black manager, who said to him, I think he might have had like a swastika on his hand, and she reached out and said loving words to him. instead of being repelled by it. So we would have people like that on our live stream. And then we thought, well, how are we going to be able to give some, some sort of compensation to our guides? So we started doing cooking shows. I mean, clearly that's a stretch, but they just wanted to try, Aziz wanted to try so hard to be able to continue to support the families. Another thing that happened during COVID is, we were so excited for Aziz's book, Crossing Boundaries. It was like, people were going to hear his story, and he was going to have a book tour, and it came out right during COVID, the beginning of COVID. Now, so we didn't have, the book tour was online. Funny enough, just last week, a big a travel website listed it as one of the books of the year because it didn't get a chance before, and they said it's so timely, so, yeah.
We had one more question come in from online. Has Mejdi Tours resumed tours to Israel and Palestine?
We have. Now, it's tricky because of the airlines, but we have had several. And one of the reasons we wanted to do it is so that people could see on the ground people were working together. Palestinians in the West Bank and Israelis, peace builders from the local communities, were still working together. Yes.
One last
Oh.
question.
Thanks so much for your talk. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe the KKK example that you mentioned is a nice one to think about how, like, if there's any views that are like don't deserve sort of two-sidedness, and how the company thinks about that, and also in defining the two sides of conflicts, whether it tends to be like the more moderate views on both sides, or if it really is like people who believe the other side should be annihilated, and then the same thing on the other side.
I was hesitating to tell, I'll tell this story, which might in part answer it, because Aziz talks about this. Aziz is at a talk, it was years ago, and he saw his father in the audience, and he was thinking, oh boy, wonder what's going to happen here. In the Q&A, Aziz, now this is one of those talks with Israelis and Palestinians who are both peace builders, and his dad gets up and says, what about this Holocaust thing? That might be a line for some people who would say, I don't want to talk to you, right? And Aziz thought he was just going to, fall through the floor. That's what he wanted to do. And instead, the person he was talking with said, kind of like what Aziz said to the man, Netanyahu's representative. He said, have you ever been to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum? Well, no, he hadn't. He said, well, I'd like to take you. I'd like to take you and some of your family, your friends, and they went. So is there someone beyond the pale? Yeah, like I said at the end, I'd like to be like Aziz and Moaz.
Thank you, Sharon.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you.